Thank you very much. So my name is Ahmed Gailani. I am a research fellow in industrial decarbonisation at the University of Leeds. And the title of my presentation today into the impact of the energy crisis on UK businesses and the way forward. So, as you know, most businesses and industry in the UK rely heavily on natural gas and electricity. So we have seen in the past 2 years soaring energy bills are fueling the cost of doing business, crisis. So since 2021, energy prices have increased significantly. That's 3 to 4 times increase in wholesale cost. This sometimes more than that in some periods. So that's why you see a lot of the industry calling for state support. So, for example, the steel industry or the chemicals, but also this has impacted the small businesses and SMEs. So we explored the short and long-term impacts of those increases on UK businesses. So for the purpose of this presentation, whenever we say UK businesses, that includes the industrial sectors or the energy-intensive industries and others, and also small businesses. So in terms of the short-term impacts, the uncertainty around the prices with additional strict energy contract requirement to businesses. So that's, for example, include paying high upfront deposit to secure a contract. Moreover, companies now, a lot of the companies are trapped in fixed-term contract, which was signed at the peak of the prices, as part of the energy crisis. But now some of the fuels and energy prices have come down, but they can't negotiate their fixed-term contract. So you see here more than 1 million UK small businesses trapped in high cost of energy tariffs, according to The Guardian. We've seen company insolvencies at record high since 2009, and Make UK, which is a representative for the manufacturing industry in the UK, found that 60% said high energy cost is threatening their businesses, and 13% of companies reduced their hour of operation, while 12% already made job cuts. So the government introduced the energy bills relief scheme first. So that was the gas prices was capped at 7.5 pence per kilowatt hour, and the electricity is capped to 21.1 pence per kilowatt hour. So that was the energy bills relief scheme is believed to lead to a reduction between 20 to 40% of the energy bills. And then the government introduced the less generous energy bills discount scheme. So that will run for a year. I think the total budget is 5.5 billion. So what that means is for small businesses, you will have to pay a base rate of 10.7 for gas, and you will receive a maximum discount of 0.7p on your tariff. And for electricity, for small businesses, you will be paying 30.2 pence per kilowatt hour and receive a maximum discount of 2 pence per kilowatt hour. If you are on a contract lower than that, then you will not be eligible for the discount. For the energy-intensive industries, you will receive a discount based on the 70% of the total energy used only. That means you pay fully for the 30%. So for the energy-intensive industries, you pay 9.9 for gas, and you receive a 4 pence discount as a maximum. And for electricity, 18.5, you receive nearly 9 pence as a discount. However, you can see that already the base rate in the energy bills discount scheme is lower than it was before. So that will, of course, affect a lot of businesses and industry. So in terms of long-term impacts, we at UKERC explored the emission pathways for the entire UK manufacturing industry. So we plotted the total emissions from industry from 2020 and projected that till 2050. So what we have seen, because of the energy crisis, there will be 155 million ton CO2 higher during the period from 2020 to 2050. So there will be higher emissions because of the crisis. And that is because the crisis is delaying the investment in decarbonization technologies. And because most of the decarbonization technologies rely on hydrogen, for example, but gas is already at a very high price and electricity at a very high price. So hydrogen, of course, will be very expensive. So that delaying the curve, and they will affect the deployment of hydrogen while electricity deployment is increased. So we found that the investment in decarbonization technologies is delayed by at least 5 years. And the industry point out that these high prices are obstacle to decarbonizing the industry and may lead to carbon leakage. And there's questions of energy affordability and security. So if you look to the energy trilemma triangle and try to interpret that for the industrial sector, it just doesn't fit, because you don't have a security of supply because you're relying on gas, and that is mostly imported. The carbon emission is high as expected in the pathway, and the products are not affordable. So we are in a situation that even the energy triangle won't fit it. And with that, I conclude my presentation, and I will hand over to Friederike from the FSB. So she is a policy advisor for energy, environment, and infrastructure. And FSB represents nearly 5.5 million small businesses and the self-employed. Up to you, Friederike.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for the introduction and the opportunity to have this conversation with you about the impact of the energy price crisis on small businesses. And yes, as Ahmed just said, that the Federation of Small Businesses is an organization that started in 1974 and has been lobbying on behalf of small businesses, but also primarily on micro businesses and the self-employed across the UK, with offices both in Blackpool, where we started, as well as in Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. And I sit in the Westminster team. So really excited to share our research that we've conducted over the past year. I'll share my screen if I can. Bear with me. And go. Can you see that on your end? Yeah, you're nodding. Great, thank you. So yeah, as you've already mentioned, SMEs have been severely impacted by the energy price crisis, as have all businesses across the UK. So it's really important that we highlight the impacts of those cost increases on SMEs. And we conducted several surveys last year, actually the first one last year in May, and found that 96% of all small firms are concerned about the energy price crisis. 38% actually said that they were extremely concerned, and that was last year, especially after the prices started rising again in the spring. The sectors in particular concerned are those in accommodation and food, business and accommodation and food sector, the whole foods and retail, and then also manufacturing. So all businesses are concerned, all businesses are impacted by it, but we see specific sectors that are more affected than others. And we've seen it over the past year, especially the hospitality sector has been particularly been affected. Overall, we found that 44% of small firms have seen their costs increase by either double, triple, or higher. Some have seen cost increases not as high, but again, that could be because they're maybe in more professional services, working from home, self-employed, for instance. As an example, I think it's good to visualize these things. We have one example from a manufacturing business that saw their monthly cost increase from £10,000 to £60,000, and that was due to a wholesale rate increase from 13p per kilowatt hour to 87p per kilowatt hour. So that is a dramatic increase, which obviously is very difficult for a business to stomach. We always say that this is not an isolated cost pressure on small firms, although I think we always say we should consider the energy price crisis in context with the wider cost of doing business crisis. And the FSB runs a quarterly small business index where we measure the small business confidence across the UK, and found that at the end of last year, we have new figures coming in, but we're still waiting for the results. But at the end of last year, so Q4 2022, we saw a confidence level of minus 45.8, and that dropped from the beginning of the year from plus 15 down to minus 45. So that's really concerning. And the main driver behind this obviously is are the utility costs, with energy cost right at the top of that, as you can clearly see here, followed by fuel cost. And that was mentioned by over 61%. That's the main driver behind this. As I mentioned, all businesses are affected by this, and they're trying to obviously cope with the impact of the energy price crisis. And the mitigation efforts we've seen across the board, obviously the first one is price increases, but also cancelling or scaling down plans for investing or expanding their business. We also know that businesses can't necessarily pass on the cost, just simply because they have had to do this maybe already in response to the COVID pandemic, but then also they know that there's also cost of living crisis, and their customers couldn't pay for instance, a for £17 one wash at a laundrette, or £25 pizza, for instance. So they basically threading that fine line of managing the cost, but also knowing that if they increase it too much, they will lose more customers. As you mentioned, the Energy Bill Relief Scheme has provided significant support, so vital support for small firms across the country. And obviously, we were very disappointed to see that support curtailed through the Energy Bill Discount Scheme, which launched at the beginning of April. The group that we're particularly concerned about are those businesses that lock themselves into a contract between last year, July and December. So that was when the energy prices were at the peak high. And obviously, we didn't know that prices would come down again. So and also you had to renew your contract at the end of the day. So we're really concerned about this. We estimate about 370,000 businesses that may be now locked into contract for a year or longer at really high prices. Those businesses are not benefiting, obviously, from the drop in wholesale prices and have to manage this cost. That is the cliff edge we were really concerned about. And obviously, we've been trying to find routes to help businesses navigate this. And one of our propositions is you probably have seen that across the industry already, is the blend and extend proposal, where you can blend your original rate with the more up-to-date rate, and then extending contract in order to benefit from the drop in the wholesale rates, but also cushion the impact of the costs a bit. Otherwise, we may risk losing more businesses that are unable to pay for the high costs. And as I mentioned, there are businesses that are seeing increases over several tens of thousands of pounds every month. In addition, so just going one step back, in addition to obviously dealing with the cost increases and trying to manage this, I think the crisis has also demonstrated there are some issues within the non-domestic retail market that we need to address. Within obviously the small business community, you have the micro businesses, you have the sole traders. There is that basically power imbalance between the supplier and the customer, of understanding the wholesale market, understanding standing charges, understanding security deposits. And that's something that has become quite obvious during the crisis, because there is a lot of uncertainty and the call for more information from suppliers. So this crisis demonstrates that we need to address this. Ofgem has addressed this particular issue with micro business already through their micro business strategic review. That was something we really welcomed. The recognition that micro business in particular are more akin to the domestic side in terms of their expertise, the level of time they have. They don't have an energy manager to help them navigate a contract and renegotiate a contract. But we still feel like there's more that can be done, including cooling off periods for something we've been calling for. In light of the crisis now, we've been calling for a cap on the standing charges. We've seen that there's a big issue for our small businesses, but also security deposits. So more clarity, more transparency, helping businesses understand and navigate that non-domestic retail market. in the long term, obviously, we have the immediate support through EBRS, EBDS. We have to look at the non-domestic retail market, or what can be done to help the suppliers and customers work better together. But in the long run, it's not the panacea where we say it's not going to solve everything, but great energy efficiency and also investment in microgeneration for small firms is part of the solution. It won't solve the situation now because it's a long-term solution, but we'll have to look into this. And in response to our survey, we found that 16% of small firms have already looked at energy efficiency in response to the energy crisis. So they have made that investment because they've realized that this is the way for them to bring down the cost. And that demonstrates there is room for improvement. 8% of small firms we know had to pause their investment because of the cost, but at the same time, 16% have said, this is the opportunity where I can save the cost because we don't know where the market is heading. Overall, as you can see on this slide here, we've conducted research just ahead of COP26 2021 and found that 67% of small firms have taken steps to address energy usage, and that is really good. But that could be anything. In that research, we asked anything from LED lights over to a wind turbine, and we have some great examples of a business, a wedding venue, actually in Blackburn, that is powered by a wind turbine. We also have a holiday cottage in Scotland that's powered by solar panels, and it's installing EV charge points. So these examples of small firms already pre-crisis that have, because of their investment in renewable or energy efficiency, have that created some sort of cushion and protection. But obviously more needs to be done. In terms of the barriers, I guess that's now, how can we make that change happen? How can we empower more businesses to do this? Obviously, there are the big structural the structural problems we have to look at. Grid capacity is the big one that always gets mentioned, as well as supply chain constraints. These are the big questions that the government has started to address through a number of strategies. And grid capacity, I think, is one of the really big obstacles we see, where a lot of businesses don't understand why they cannot for instance, install more solar panels, but they have the willingness, they have the capital, but there is that restraint on that side. In addition to these big structural changes, for small business point of view, the three main barriers we think, in addition to information, understanding really what you can do or could do, is a lot on the finance side. So return on investment takes too long. Obviously, that has changed when we asked the question in 2021. That was pre-energy price crisis, so that has shifted slightly. But the lack of capital is a really big problem. Then with the small business community, there's also another additional layer that always gets overlooked, is the type of premise you're renting, you're occupying. So a lot of small firms are renting their property, which means there again is a limitation of what they can do if their landlord, for instance, doesn't encourage them to invest in energy efficiency or wants to make that investment themselves. So from our point of view, we see there is great opportunity as the willingness among the small business community to invest in energy efficiency and microgeneration, to look at renewables. We need to have more support and empowering businesses to do this. One of the solutions we put forward is an initiative called Help to Green. It's a voucher scheme it's two parts basically. It's information and an energy audit, kind of understanding what it is that you need to do. You don't want to go out and install a heat pump if that's not the right solution for you. But then at the same time also up to £5,000 voucher where you can make that investment. We are really happy to see that the majority of trade organizations we've spoken to, so 12 have stepped forward and signed a letter that we sent to the Chancellor before the budget, have come out and supported the Help to Green initiative. Chris Skidmore in his net zero review has also picked it up and called it the Help to Grow Green solution, where you have that audit voucher system, but also the government's number of strategy that came out a couple of weeks ago included a pilot as well that looks at a grant scheme, at an advice and grant scheme that could help businesses. It's a pilot scheme at the moment, but that will help more businesses make that step towards energy efficiency. I think I'm slowly running out of time. I just want to summarize, I guess, just that we need to look at three parts, I guess. Look at support through this crisis, navigating this crisis at the moment. As I mentioned, the one group of vulnerable customers that we're looking at the moment, those businesses signed up for contracts last summer to December that we need to support now and find some ways. And we're working with off-German suppliers to find solutions, but also looking at structural difficulties within the retail market. In the long term, we may have to look at energy efficiency, microgeneration, and everything that really is part of that. That's from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Friederike. This was an interesting presentation, and yeah, it's very good to see businesses are ready to adopt some energy efficiency options. I'll hand now the microphone to Arjan he's the Director of Energy Intensive Users Group. So Arjan spent 15 years working on energy and climate change policies, and the Energy Intensive User Group is an umbrella organization that represents the interests of energy intensive industry consumers. Up to you, Arjan.
Thank you, Ahmed. As mentioned, I'm Arjan Geveke, Director of the EIUG, as we call it, and I represent the interest for energy intensive sectors. And these are steel, chemicals, paper pulp, glass, cement, ceramics, and industrial gases. So these are the most energy as well as electricity as gas intensive manufacturing industries you can imagine. So the issues are therefore slightly different compared to Friederike's members. It's probably worthwhile explaining. You might think that energy intensive industries are particularly hard hit by the energy crisis because due to their consumption volume, they're more exposed to energy prices and therefore the energy cost. But it's a bit more nuanced because of the contract that most energy intensive industries have, which is different than small and medium-sized businesses. Because of their exposure and the risk to energy-intensive industries of energy prices, they tend to have a more sophisticated procurement process to negotiate an energy supply contract. Government has basically classified these as flexible. So what generally happens that energy-intensive industries contract 2 years out for a part of the consumption volume. They contract 1 year out for another part of it. They contract season out for another part of it, and perhaps they top it off with buying on the spot market. And that depends very much on the risk appetite that an energy-intensive industry has. Now, that doesn't mean that they all do that. It's basically on a whole dimension. Some energy-intensive industries buy purely on a spot market. Other energy-intensive industries fix the price or their consumption and the price completely. But on average, you can say that there's much more degree of more flexible, so-called flexible contracts, where there's part is hedged in different ways with the suppliers. Now you have to bear in mind that suppliers do this actually exactly the same. They hedge their position as well. It does mean that the increase in electricity prices or energy prices you've seen last year does not immediately impact or reflect into higher retail prices for these industries because they've hedged themselves. Up to a point. Obviously, all these hedges will expire at one point, and then you will be these companies will be exposed to the energy prices. But as Friederike already mentioned, prices have come down, and obviously that helps. What is more of a concern for energy industry in particular is their relatively price differential with other countries. So that relates to the electricity and gas price, but also with the schemes that government has introduced to support business through the prices. So okay, absolute level is yes, there's one, but how does that compare to their level of support in other countries? And that because that could still lead to a price differential, then have a competitive disadvantage. The debate on the industry side is a bit more on to what extent has energy prices lead to demand destruction or energy efficiency. Because these industries tend to also be capital intensive, it's not that easy to quickly increase your energy efficiency because that requires quite a lot of upfront capital and have long-term benefits. So it's more difficult to make if you're in a crisis mode. You have seen a degree of demand destruction, particularly from fertilizer companies, because they use gas both as a consumption as an energy source as well as a feedstock to produce fertilizer. And you've seen it in the UK and across Europe that fertilizer plants are basically shut down because they are probably most exposed to the increase in gas prices. But for the rest, demand destruction is probably less than you might have expected. So, but that sets the scene for energy-intensive industries. The issues that the 2 points similar that Friederike has is in competition in the non-domestic energy market. Again, it's slightly different for energy-intensive industries. Well, you have more consumer protection for micro businesses and not for industrial and commercial sized customers, because that's right, they have increased bargaining power, so they have a dedicated energy manager often, so they understand the market better and therefore can negotiate a supply contract better on behalf of their business. Similar to what Friederike has done, I have issued a small survey to my members as well about the state of competition in the non-domestic market, and that got prompted after certain non-domestic suppliers have been drawn from the market. There has not been a supplier failure, as you have seen in the domestic market, but instead you have suppliers deciding to exit the market. So not a forced exit, but still a voluntary exit because they found the risk of operating in the non-domestic market simply too high. They still honor, obviously, their existing contractual agreement, but they said they will not take on any new customers. To the extent what has happened, some suppliers have put out a press release, so we know. Other suppliers may have just quietly left the market. And that's reflected in the feedback to what I've got. Normally, if a really energy-intensive industry goes out, they go to a tendering process. They say they put it on the market and they ask suppliers to bid in, saying, do you want to be my supplier? And the number of bids or offers that have come back is a lot lower than previous energy crisis. So there's an indication of that competition has reduced in the non-domestic market. That's one element. The other elements are the qualitatively elements of a supply is basically upfront deposit, lock-in of your deposit, and increasing of management fees. And you've seen this happening as well. But luckily, again, the non-domestic market has not been seen the same issues as the domestic market. Third point is probably security of supply. That's obviously increased concern as well. You have the idea of a physical security supply where energy-intensive industries can be forcefully disconnected if national grid declares an energy emergency, and all the incentives in the system are in place not to reach that point, which is good, and certainly didn't happen. Were higher this winter than previous winter, as set out by National Grid in the autumn last year, but they've put in additional measures to mitigate that risk. But that's again on the physical security of energy supply. So you actually get the electron or the gas molecule in. Obviously, you also have an economic dimension. Can energy-intensive industry still pay the price and able to negotiate a supply? It's slightly more tricky on that side, where you do have seen some shutdowns of energy-intensive industries, and that links back to basically demand restriction. Just quickly on industrial decarbonisation, obviously that continues as well. One thing is energy efficiency. That's the same thing as Friederike said, but it's slightly again more the different ways to decarbonize industrial sectors than probably for small businesses. And then you go into the area of electrification of industrial processes, moving to hydrogen or applying CCUS, carbon capture, uses and storage. But as I've been pointing out to my former colleagues in the department, electrification, hydrogen, CCS are all electricity intensive processes. So therefore you can't really escape the issue of electricity prices. The higher the relative electricity prices, the more you disincentivize electrification, hydrogen, CCUS. This is a more odd conundrum that UK government hasn't quite solved. Going back to finally to Friederike's point about support for the crisis. So the government has issued support. Initially, the energy bill relief scheme for all businesses, and from 1st of April this year is the energy bill discount scheme, marginally for all business, but slightly more for energy-intensive industries. But for most of the energy-intensive industries, probably the threshold to trigger the scheme or benefit from the scheme is now higher than actually the wholesale price is. So I don't think a lot of energy, the scheme won't be used that lot, but it will be if you have, for example, indeed, as Friederike said, you lock yourself into a contract at the height of the energy price last year for a year, then you do become eligible for this. But just going to point out, it's there's a threshold, there's then a discount, and after discount has been reached, maximized, then you pay the full price again. So it's only a temporary element in that scheme. On the retail market, there's slightly different issues on the INC customers than on SMEs. My members are probably a little bit nervous that any discussion on the domestic market should not immediately mean that they should apply to the non-domestic, at least for INC customers as well, because the competition in the energy market worked relatively well before the energy price crisis started to hit. And the final one, energy efficiency. Yes, that needs to be keep on going with their own capital investment in energy efficiency, with climate change tax breaks on the climate change agreements and the industrial energy transformation. But there are also other big technology items such as hydrogen, CCUS, and electrification that that basically energy industries need to have support from, because their balance sheet simply cannot hold these upfront costs. That's it.
Thank you very much, Arjan. That was really interesting. So now we open the discussions to the audience, and there will be some questions and answers. Please type your questions in the questions and answer box, and I will try to answer them and get them to our panelists. So I'll start with the first questions, which is the most upvoted one from Rob. I believe that he was referring to my presentation. So the question was, the delay of hydrogen whilst electricity is accelerated suggests that would be for blue hydrogen. For the blue and the green hydrogen thing, there are two things. In the short term, both blue hydrogen and green hydrogen doesn't look interesting, because there's a high gas price which sets the price of electricity in the market. Therefore, both the blue hydrogen and the green hydrogen are not attractive. In the long term, if the electricity price is decoupled from the gas prices in the market, for example, if you can access the price of electricity at the price point of renewable energy plants, so for example wind farms, then green hydrogen will look attractive. But I just want to ask another question for Arjan, please. It seems that we are now living in a new age of autarky, in which, for example, the US has legislated the new act, Biden administration, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the EU has initiated some other acts, I think the Green Plan or something like this. So why we are in the UK not doing like the same to attract like small businesses and SMEs who are innovating and have great technologies that we onshore those into the UK rather than they go to US and EU for slight more preferable regulations.
Yeah. So what the US Inflation Reduction Act does is providing tax breaks to low carbon technologies. It's wide. It focuses on tech as well, but certainly stimulates investment in batteries and all that kind of stuff. And you do hear the noises about multinationals saying that's more attractive, so you got investment over there. Financial Times had an article the other day, basically already listing those announcements and the value involved in that. It's certainly debates, and I've got the impression from the US it's a bit more concrete. If you look at the EU, it's a repackaging of new existing stuff in a new format and then presented as this is our rival stuff. You can poke through it relatively easy, saying, well, this is not really new, this bad. So it's not that credible. The UK government has been relatively quiet because it just doesn't have the money.
Okay, thank you.
Secretary Chancellor Hunt basically says that we'll perhaps set something out in the autumn statement, so that's in the autumn. But you think, yeah, by that time the investment system will have been made and you've lost the opportunity. So that's certainly the debate, and I've seen some investment moves, but not like a tsunami that everybody says, well, we're going to invest in the US now. But it's certainly drawn people's attention.
Yes, thank you very much. Another question for Friederike. You know, while some people are sympathetic about, you know, businesses signed out contract at the highest or peak of the crisis, in which they get trapped into fixed term contract. But is that like was a bad decision from businesses, and should Ofgem and government help those businesses or let them negotiate that fixed term contract?
I guess as that small business, you didn't really have a choice because your contract was up for renewal. So if you were up for renewal in August or in September, and we know from business they try to negotiate with their energy suppliers and try to shop around. The problem, especially last year, there were periods where it was very difficult to shop around because there was just nothing to shop around. There was nothing really on the market. So as a business, you didn't have a choice. We know from some businesses that try to keep the contracts quite short. So only tried to agree a contract that was a year. That was also an offer made by a lot of suppliers that recognize this is a time of uncertainty. So locking businesses into 2 to 3 year long contracts would be would provide quite a difficult situation for those firms. The government has recognized that. I guess that's why we had the energy bill relief scheme, that those businesses needed support. There was nothing really they could do because they weren't able to hedge the cost. It's just different from for the, you know, energy intensive businesses. And I guess the other difference is because it's either the difference between a fixed contract and a variable contract, but I guess for businesses, sort of small business, is that certainty of knowing what they have to pay every month. You don't have that much savings, upfront savings. You have a couple of months maybe, but that is basically what they would have, and they need to plan ahead in order to run their business effectively. So in that sense, they didn't have a choice. We agree that the government can't, it's difficult for the government to provide support in the long run. We know that this was a temporary scheme because obviously it's the government's need to make sure that there is enough support for businesses, but also that it couldn't go on indefinitely. So we understood that there was always a timestamp on this, but we raised the issue, and a lot of business group have raised the issue that cliff edge in April that we now have is a very difficult one, because we knew this cliff edge would come, that the prices would then shoot up again to what they were originally on your energy contract. And that's where we thought that was not the right decision. And through the collaboration with the suppliers of offering extended or blended contracts, that will be a way around that everybody, you find a solution that works for the suppliers, because we know the suppliers need to be also financially viable. We don't want any more suppliers to go under, as we've seen in the last year, but also we want to make sure that the business community is staying afloat, because these are the customers for the suppliers, but also small businesses are the lifeline for communities, especially in rural parts of the country.
Thank you very much. A question for Arjan. What support would intensive users like to see from the government in the next next long term?
I'm going to split that up. One is on electricity prices. So it's the continued effort basically to implement basically the announcement that all the government has made this year and the previous year, to reduce some of the policy cost on industrial electricity prices in particular, so that they are more aligned with industrial electricity prices in Europe. And it's reducing that relatively price differential. That's one of the key aims, and that would stimulate investment as well as in decarbonisation. On the industrial decarbonization one hand focus on energy efficiency. So that focus on industrial energy transformation fund. That has helped, and that is popular, and industry industries and other business are using it, but obviously it runs out at one point. So continuation of that scheme, because energy efficiency will not stop after this budget cycle, it will continue as well. So having a more structural, some kind of like IETF, that will help. For the rest, it's the hydrogen and CCUS models that government is setting up, and see how that works, and that will help to potentially to decarbonize industrial clusters. It's now a question what you do with energy industries and dispersed sites, i.e. those outside these clusters. Electrification is still a bit of another trick thing, because it's linked to the whole industrial electricity price differential. I am gonna plug one other thing, which is the reform of the UK ETS. So government consulted last year to make that carbon price consistent and withdraw free allowances. That is causing anxiety and may pose a substantial problem for energy-intensive industries, as long as government doesn't at the same time introduce some mitigation measures to mitigate the risk of carbon leakage. Government has now also consulted with the consultation 2 weeks ago about that, with measures like carbon border adjustments and product standards, but they should be linked, and you can't do the one without the other one.
Thank you. And for Friederike, coming back to you, you mentioned that the business pilot energy advisor scheme, which is still in preparation. Does FSP have a view on that, and how this should be delivered to maximize its effectiveness for your members?
Yes, we welcome the scheme very much. As I mentioned, it is we put forward a help to green proposal, which in essence is similar, where you have an audit and you have the grant or voucher. So we were really happy to see that the government took on this idea and is developing their own pilot scheme. Obviously, from our point of view, we are in a crisis. This is an energy price crisis, but we also need to look at decarbonisation. So we've welcomed the pilot, but obviously from our point of view, we could go further, and we need to also accelerate this. So once this pilot is up and running, we can see the benefits. We hope this will be rolled out across the country. We obviously have to see the details before we know exactly how it's going to work, but we're really supportive of the scheme, and really look forward to working with the government to roll this out and make this a success, and get as many businesses sign up for it as possible.
Thank you very much. Another question for you, Friederike, is given those barriers that you mentioned in your talk for facing small businesses, do you see a role for some form of efficiency as a service? So that's energy efficiency as a service, or other risk reducing mechanism to help incentivize energy efficiency measures?
I guess there are. I guess any really solution that could increase energy efficiency, as also helps businesses navigate this, that is always beneficial. I think we have to think outside the box of how we get to energy efficiency, how we get to decarbonisation. The ways we looked at it the old ways of looking at things don't necessarily apply. So I feel like we need to look at all mechanisms and so forth. And it does also, I guess, depend on your business. There are a lot of sectors across the board, a lot of different regions. So and the incentive, obviously, if it's something that works with your business plan that you can easily incorporate, that would be really good.
Thank you very much. For Arjan, one question here. I think it's interesting. On the energy generation side, you mentioned, that electricity is essential to decarbonize energy-intensive industries. What are your views on the likelihood of increasing nuclear generation in the UK, and will that solve things long term or cause more problems? I think this is a tricky question.
You're going to get a diplomatic answer from me. I'm agnostic about the technology, but you can see the certain links. So if you look at the certain manufacturing processes of energy-intensive industries, they need to have some kind of continuous supply of energy, electricity or gas. And so you can, in theory, link it up with a low carbon technology that has a continuous generates electricity and heat in a continuous way. You think about nuclear. Although if you have a nuclear power station, it basically still generates too much electricity for one single electricity intensive company to actually absorb. So then the debate go into small modular reactors, but that's still not quite proven, still in the theoretical phase. But as mentioned, the other thing is, again, if you have an electricity demand and a stable heat demand, nuclear power stations have a stable electricity output and a stable heat output. So you can see, in theory, a match over there.
Thank you very much. For Friederike, many businesses understand, you mentioned there are some barriers, for example, to adopt energy efficiency measures, such as the landlord, rejecting those schemes or other, social science things. And many businesses understand that what they need to do. However, there are others that do not believe in renewable energy or clean technologies, such as, for example, heat pumps. Do you think there's a place for government or any other organization to push businesses more to reduce carbon and actually save money?
The landlord tenancy barrier it's quite a tricky one. We've addressed this in our net zero report, and we're calling on the government to set up some sort of, a stakeholder group that addresses this issue. I know there's the energy efficiency task force, and we are speaking to government about this repeatedly. So I know they're thinking about it as well. And I think you just have to think of what incentives you can use to make it appealing for the landlord to invest in it now, because obviously it's beneficial for their own premise in the long run. We have heard from businesses that have really good relationships with the landlords, and I guess there is that collaboration and the willingness to have the conversation. So the first thing we always recommend is having that conversation with the landlord. I think one thing that needs to be addressed, which possibly is a major barrier, is the cost issue of who pays for it and what happens to it. So if you install, say, solar panels, the landlord doesn't want it, how can this be shared? The cost, could this be the cost for the solar panel linked to the premise, and then it's partly paid through your rent or through your energy costs? I think there's been a really old scheme like 10 years ago that that had that model already in place. So I think, again, have to think outside the box, but have that conversation, because it's inevitable that we have to have that conversation. But we do understand there are still barriers, and some outlets are not keen to have the conversation yet.
Thank you very much indeed.
So if I can comment on that.
Yeah, sure.
So in energy industry, you don't really have that problem between landlord and tenant. They generally own the premises and the manufacturing. But what you do have is the difference between the energy management and the financial director. And that's something in SMEs, that's the same person. In a bigger organization, it's not. So if you look at the research and the literature on energy efficiency, particularly in the industrial side, just for the energy manager's ability to get into the internal decision-making process and convince the financial director to make a case in energy efficiency is sometimes or often still a stumbling block. So there is that incentive incompatibility that larger companies have. Just one point on energy efficiency as well. It's a bit more nuanced than basically sometimes that's just access to capital. There's technically, or in theory, enough capital. It's access to capital at the right price.
That's interesting. Thank you. I think this question is for both of you, which looking forward to the future of the businesses in the UK, both manufacturing and small businesses. Will we ever see energy prices back to their early 2021, or our higher prices are here to stay? And what difference would a higher price regime means to your members in the longer term?
I can go first. From what I understand, I'm citing the experts here. So I guess they're the experts who understand the energy market in terms of what's happening on the wholesale market better than I do. I don't, as far as I know, we're not expecting prices to go back the way they were. So they're expected to remain higher, even if we hopefully past the peaks that we've seen last year. I guess, again, as already alluded through the conversation, there may be a change on the retail market because you have the decoupling of gas and electricity that will change. Obviously, that will bring down electricity prices, or hopefully bring down electricity prices. So in general, higher energy prices for small firms it's something, obviously it's an additional cost burden. Obviously other cost pressures hopefully will ease. That will help business in the long run, but any higher costs at the moment are still continued pressure, and we see businesses still locked into those contracts. So for the coming years, we expect these cost pressures to not go away. And we'll have to see, I guess, where the transition to net zero will also lead. So it's a lot of uncertainty, I think, on the energy market, that business need to weather this storm, but hopefully not as high as we've seen the price of the past couple of years.
Yeah, I agree. It's similar. So up to a point, the high gas prices are basically determined by politics, and in particularly the politics following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And until that changes, I can't see gas prices going down to the same level as we had before the war. And in the UK case, the gas price determines the more or less is the marginal plant that sets the wholesale electricity market price. So that's an uncomfortable reality as well, until the point you are able to change that and disconnect basically gas setting the high wholesale price from the rest of the market. That's part of the discussion under the retail electricity market arrangement review, REMA. But it is complex, and I have seen certain ideas from academics whether it can work in practice. Opinion is still divided amongst everybody on that.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting from both of you. One final thing I will need to bring to the discussion is the decarbonisation of energy intensive, actually not just energy intensive industries. If we want to reach to net zero, we will have to decarbonize both energy intensive and non-energy intensive. What energy intensive users group are really thinking currently about the decarbonization? Is that thrown aside right now while they are thinking to survive and be competitive compared to our international counterparts? Or what is their thinking right now?
The first thing that comes off is survival, because there's no point in investing in low carbon technologies in the long term and then you're not there. So that will be the thing. But moving to low carbon world is also part of your survival process. So it's not completely disconnected, but the first thing is, but basically with all the pressure, how can we survive?
And you, Friederike, does you remember think about decarbonizing their energy use? You mentioned like there are some energy storage and installation or on-site installation of some electricity generation.
It's a mixed bag. We know that some businesses are steamrolling ahead because they recognize the opportunity. And if, for instance, they were locked into a contract for the past 2-3 years, they may have been shielded by the impact of the energy price crisis, or if they had already invested in some sort of renewable energy generation. So we know that businesses are pushing ahead if they can. Others had to delay, but again, delay and not scrapping their plans completely. So that is what we hear, and we know that businesses have also looked into this, even if it's just looking at energy efficiency in general, even if it's just switching to LED lights, which it's a simple step and it's probably not going to have a big impact on your energy bill, but thinking about these steps that you can take, we know that they are taking those steps because they're quite keen about this. And from our conversation we had as part of our net zero research, we know that small business recognize the role they have to play, even if they don't fully understand exactly how they're going to get there yet, but they know they have a role to play. And this, I guess, is the cost saving that is an opportunity for them as well. So it's a really mixed bag, and we just hope that through support, the pilot scheme, for instance, that we can help businesses accelerate that.
Thank you very much. And one final question before we finish this webinar. It was a really interesting discussion. Is energy demand the elephant in the room that we didn't think about? Because if energy prices is gonna stay high, what role of reducing energy demand will it play in order to be more efficient and save a lot of cost for both of you?
So that depends what you mean with energy demand. So is it
So
energy efficiency, or is it shifting your energy demand at certain times, like the products that National Grid has introduced, or is it indeed what I mentioned is just lowering energy demand, which could mean energy demand destruction? Which one do you mean?
yeah, what I meant is shifting energy demand from one time to another. I know, like for some industries, this is like not possible because some industries just run for the whole day. But does it have our in the emergency industries?
Yeah, so I'm involved in both the demand side responses from on the gas side for industry, as well as on the electricity side with demand flexibility services. You probably need to organize another webinar on this, because that will take up an hour as well.
Yeah.
For energy industries, in principle, yes, it's a good idea. It's just design of the two products on electricity and gas. It has not quite worked, depending on the kind of manufacturing process you operate.
Thank you.
I guess on the SME side, it's possible there may be exemption. Again, we have manufacturing businesses in our membership as well, and there are small businesses that manufacturing businesses. But if you look at the holistically at the SME at SMEs, it's possibly not that easy to shift your demand. If you're a coffee shop, if you're a laundrette, you have to run your services. The customer wants their coffee at 8 a.m. on the way to work, so it's a bit more difficult. And it's limitations. There are really small pockets of SMEs that possibly can actually think about that.
Thank you very much indeed. And with that, I conclude our webinar at 3 o'clock. And there's a feedback survey that will be sent to all our participants. I appreciate if you can fill that, please, so we can know more about our performance and how to improve the webinar series at UKERC. As usual, we the UK Energy Research Centre thank our speakers and the participant, and wish you all good luck and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you much. Goodbye.
Thank you.